All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Andrew Berman. I'm the Executive Director of Village Preservation, and we're here today with the new school and an incredible array of speakers to unveil a plaque honoring the incredible history of this building behind me, 75th Avenue. You're going to hear from a lot of wonderful speakers today, followed by the unveiling. I will let you know one of our speakers was not able to be here today at the last minute, Jeffrey Eaton from the NAACP, who tested positive for COVID. So of course he's doing the prudent thing and staying away, but we're well represented nevertheless. I'm going to start by saying a few words about village preservation and our plaque program. This is our 20th plaque unveiling, marking sites and honoring local figures from James Baldwin to Jane Jacobs, Lorraine Hansberry to Leroy Jones, Anais Nin to Alex Haley, and painter Jean-Michel Basquiat to the Picasso of dance, Martha Graham, who there's a plaque honoring her just next door on another new school building where her original dance of school was located. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Village Preservation is a membership-based nonprofit around since 1980, whose mission is to document, celebrate, and preserve the special architectural and cultural heritage of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and NoHo. We hold about 75 free public programs each year to illuminate this history, and we've successfully advocated for landmark protections for more than 1,250 buildings in our neighborhoods and zoning protections for nearly 100 blocks. Yes. Thank you very much. Today's plaque unveiling reflects the confluence of two areas of special focus of our work. The first is elevating civil rights, social justice, and artistic history, all of which are exemplified by 75th Avenue. Another is seeking to preserve and protect the largely unlandmarked area of our neighborhoods south of Union Square, which is where we are now, which is so rich in this type of incredible architecture and rich history, which is also exemplified by this building. I'll note that in 2021, we were able to convince the city to landmark 75th Avenue with the support of the new school, but we have much more work to do in protecting this area. Thankfully, with the plaque that we'll be unveiling today, this wonderful history will be a little more accessible for everyone to see. And what a truly remarkable history it is. Some of our other speakers will go into greater depth, but briefly, this building behind me was built in 1912 and served as the headquarters for the very young NAACP, founded in 1909, which is the country's oldest civil rights organization. They remained here until about 1925, when they moved just a block to the north, just north of 14th Street. During their time here, the NAACP was the leading voice against the plague of lynching across the country. They battled segregation in the federal workforce, which had just been implemented in 1913 by President Woodrow Wilson. They fought defamatory representations in media, such as the film Birth of a Nation, and they took on groundbreaking and effective legal strategies against racial discrimination in voting, education, housing, and employment. There's some evidence to suggest that the NAACP began flying its iconic "A Man Was Lynched Yesterday" flag from this building while located here. We know that they did from their next headquarters in a since demolished building just north of 14th Street. Additionally, The Crisis magazine, the first magazine for African Americans, edited by W.E.B. Du Bois, was located here, giving voice to the civil rights movement and to the Harlem Renaissance, showcasing early works by Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Countee Cullen, among many others. The magazine also notably championed women's suffrage and gave prominent leadership roles to women. The Brownies book, the first book ever published for African American children, was also published here by W.E.B. Du Bois and August Granville Dill's publishing company located in the building. But that's in many ways just the tip of the proverbial iceberg of the historic significance of this building. Other organizations originally located here include the ACLU, the American Federation of Teachers, the Citizens National Committee for Sacco and Vanzetti, the League for the Abolition of Capital Punishment, the Women's Peace Party, the League for Industrial Democracy, from which Students for a Democratic Society, or SDS, eventually grew, Andrew Carnegie's Council for Ethics in International Affairs, and Robert Morgenthau Sr.'s Near East Foundation, established to call attention to and prevent the Armenian genocide, among many other critical organizations. Some of the prominent individuals involved with or who founded the groups located here include Upton Sinclair, Clarence Darrow, Jack London, Norman Thomas, Crystal Eastman, Jane Addams, and Carrie Chapman Catt, among many others. If this wasn't enough, some of the most important and prolific publishers of the 20th century were located here, as was the National Board of Review of Motion Pictures, which played a profound role in shaping the motion picture industry in America, single-handedly deciding what content would or would not appear in film by either granting or denying their stamp of approval for movies. This was established as an alternative to censorship, which others had pushed for in the early 20th century. This interweaving of civil rights activism, the arts, and commerce and industry is emblematic of the rich history of this neighborhood south of Union Square, and it perhaps has no more vivid manifestation than in this building. We're proud to be able to work with all of our partners here to be able to make that history a little more apparent and a little more accessible to the public with today's plaque unveiling. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to just say a big thank you to all of the Village Preservation staff who were so involved in making this possible. Juan Rivero, David Berman, Sarah Eccles, Hugh Evans. Am I missing anybody who's here? Did I catch everybody? Anna Markham, I think Anna was here before. And I also want to extend a big thanks to Mary Sneed at the New School for all of her work in putting this together. And to say thank you to everybody at the New School. I say this at all of our plaque unveilings. You would think it would be an easy thing to get a property owner to say, yes, I want a plaque honoring my building on it. It's not. It's wonderful to have a partner like the New School, which clearly cares about history, cares about the community, and has been such a wonderful and willing partner in this endeavor. So our first speaker, speaking on behalf of the New School, is its Executive Vice President for Business and Operations, Tokumbo Shobowale.
Wow, thank you. This is really a momentous occasion. So I want to thank you all for joining us here at the New School. We're really literally at the heart of our campus. It's not a sort of an Ivy Tower quad, but this is what the New School is integrated with the city in the heart of Greenwich Village. So it's great to have this partnership. So it's my great pleasure welcoming here tonight to recognize the architectural and historical significance of 75th Avenue, the central academic building on our campus. On behalf of the New School, we are grateful to the Greenwich Village Society for Historic Preservation, which has led the efforts for many years to landmark and preserve the building. It's a great partnership, as you mentioned. Special thanks go to you, Andrew, as your executive director. You really spearheaded this single-handedly. And to our distinguished speakers who are joining us this evening. New School, Brian McGrath, David Levering-Lewis, Stephen Brier, Amy Aronson, our Councilmember. Really a pleasure to have you here and be part of this effort. And again, unfortunately, our other speaker couldn't make it tonight. I do want to take a moment as we're recognizing history to acknowledge the land on which we stand is the ancestral territory of the Lenape people. We pay respect to Indigenous people throughout the Lenape diaspora, past, present, and future, and honor those that have been historically and systemically disenfranchised. As members of an educational community, we endeavor to build in ways that lead toward justice and a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So I want to say that the New School acquired this building in 1972. So although our history goes back to 1919 about when the building was formed, in some ways our history with it is more recent now. As an institution woven into the physical and cultural tapestry of New York City, the New School has long advanced the values of social justice and equality to strengthen our community. Tonight, we celebrate the legacy of the educational building, as it was formerly known, an exceptional example of the Beaux Arts architectural style, which served as the headquarters for some of the most influential people and organizations of our time, then and now, as Andrew has described. These organizations gave voice to ideas and a worldview that can continue to resonate and underpin our society and culture, even more valuable today than ever. keeping with that spirit, it's fitting that 75th Avenue today is home to the university's Parsons School of Design, the leading art design school in the country, and the renowned Sheila Johnson Design Center, an academic creative hub that reflects the new school's rigorous, multidimensional approach to education, provides a street-level view into the interwoven nature of our Parsons School of Design community. This school is so much about community. For 100 years, we have benefited from being situated in the most vibrant part of New York City. We'd like to think we've contributed to it too. With the surrounding community, we share an extraordinary history, an ethos of engagement with issues and movements, awareness of the world around us, and dedication to making a positive difference, and a tremendous creative and intellectual energy. That is why I'm so pleased to be here with many of our neighbors and partners. I know our speakers this evening will bring valuable perspective to this special occasion. And now welcome my colleague, Brian McGrath, Professor of Urban Design at the Parsons School of Design, to get things started.
Thank you, Tokumbo. And this is just a continuation of my class all day. I just finished and ran over here. On behalf of the new school, I also would want to welcome you to all to our sidewalk campus in the educational building behind me. We call it 2 West 13th. If you go down, you can see the main entrance, or the L building, and it is shaped like an L. I teach in the architecture department, part of Parsons School of Constructed Environments, one of the 5 schools of Parsons, which includes undergraduate and graduate degree programs in interior, product, lighting, design, and architecture. Our hub is the top floor of the prophetically named education building. And the bulk of our studios are in the fantastic loft building just down 13th Street. You can see the red awning down there. While the University Center across Fifth Avenue is our campus, across Fifth Avenue marks the corner of our campus, which is the Cardo, the Roman north-south Main Street, and our Decumanus, 13th Street, east-west. So this is the heart of the university where we stand right now. The city is our campus. And we are happy to be stewards of so many historical buildings in Greenwich Village, especially the Joseph Urban Design Zebra Stripe building on West 12th Street. Because the city is our campus, we're grateful to have neighbors like the Greenwich Village Society for Historical Preservation, but a little bit more about that purchase, because it's interesting as a Parsons faculty member. The new school's purchase of the educational building in 1972 allowed Parsons to move downtown as it transitioned from a standalone art and design school to a division of the new school university. Now Parsons comprises more than half the university student body, transforming a legendary institution dedicated to social research to a university where design and social research drive approaches to studying the issues of our time. Today, we'll hear about many of the important organizations that have their organizations here, but I'm here to talk about the architecture of the education building as both an expert in architecture and urban design, but also as a longtime user. I first taught up here 30 years ago on the 6th floor when the architecture department just started. For 50 years, the aptly named education building has been Parsons' home, accommodating decades of tremendous growth and renewal along with our city. If those of you who've been in the city in the 70s know what I'm talking about. And I have personally witnessed 30 years of that history. For me, 75th Avenue epitomizes what I teach my students, that there's not only an architecture of buildings in the city, but an architecture of the city. We need to look at the educational building not just as a landmark object in the city, but a fragment of the city itself as a built artifact. It's only one L-shaped jigsaw puzzle piece within the larger puzzle, which is New York City. Holding an important corner on the city, 75th stands at a moment of transition from the primarily pre-war residential buildings of Lower Fifth Avenue, which you can see in brick to the right below 12th Street, marking the beginning of the blocks. You can see right at 12th it turns color and function to the dry goods buildings moving north from this corner. And you can see Fifth Avenue in these blocks are filled with these dry goods buildings, which continue to thrive. So the educational building constructed in 1912 by architect Charles Alonzo Rich for the noted publisher and philanthropist George A. Plimpton caps a transition block bounded by 5th, 12th, 6th, and 13th, comprising a mix of residential row house streets and commercial and institutional avenues. 13th Street is some way historically served as a kind of backdoor to the large commercial buildings along the crosstown 14th Street. You can see that in today in Whole Foods and Trader Joe's, how they load. Quite interesting. Parsons actually occupies not only this building, but 3 buildings on the corner. They were cleverly joined thanks to the gift by Sheila Johnston as the Sheila Johnston Design Center, which travels through the 3 buildings. There's an atrium, and more recently, a second floor making center. I'm trying not to ad-lib. I'll go off in tangents if I ad-lib. Look in our galleries and up to the second floor windows, and you will see a wood shop and computerized knitting machines on Fifth Avenue, making, not just consumption. The heart of the design center is a glass atrium covering what was formerly the back garden of one of the few remaining row houses along this part of Fifth Avenue. And you can see behind me that row house, which is 68 feet, and it only goes back 50 feet, and so the atrium goes behind that. Our ramp leads down from 66 Fifth Avenue, we're up there, through the atrium and down to West 13th Street, where most of us enter the building today. So again, this is an example of the architecture of the city, how we can connect the fragments of the city for new kinds of needs and uses. The educational building takes its striking form from the limits of the property that were assembled for its construction. It rises straight up from the street without any setback for 12 stories on a 30-foot wide residential row house block. Its irregular flag-shaped plan that gets much fatter down 13th Street occupies a narrow townhouse plot along 5th and several deeper parcels along 13th, creating a narrow 30 by 100 foot slab, which is really striking when you're coming down 13th Street, as the flag pole, and a 60 by 100 foot loft space comprising the flag itself in the back. And you can imagine a publishing house having the front office, editorial offices, the back storing books or things like that. And so it worked quite well for the publishing industry. As Carol Willis has shown in her book Form Follows Finance, the New York skyscraper was designed for easy and flexible subdivision, with an elevator core along the inner party wall and a single corridor leading to suites of offices along the narrow portion, with a larger back office space in the rear. If you've seen detective movies and the kinds of offices, turn-of-the-century buildings, you can imagine it. Like many early office buildings, this was a workhorse of the emerging white-collar city, with many small businesses and nonprofit organizations renting small suites in a building that could accommodate the growth of any organization. This was an architectural beehive that cultivated organizations like the NAACP. I can only imagine the encounters in the corridors, elevators, and lobby of 75th Avenue at the time. As I mentioned, the 12th floor to West 13th was renovated as the hub of the School of Constructed Environments while I was dean. And Lynn Rice Architects preserved the terrazzo and mosaic flooring where the old corridor can still be seen. I invite you all to come up and see it. But now there's a suite of open faculty and administrative offices along this narrow slab, and we have large student design studio spaces in the deeper zone, perfectly accommodated our mix of 8 departments, students, and faculty. enclosures block the view from the inside. Looking north, we see the Empire State Building, and south all the way to the One World Trade Center. The inner party wall, the wall that you don't see here, goes along irregular property lines to the south, including a fire escape that follows a strange angled remnant of an old farm line. New York skyscrapers before 1916 setback laws soared straight from the street, often dressed in classical detail. Like its neighbor uptown, the Flatiron Building, 75th soars straight from the sidewalk to the sky, with an arcade of windows breaking the long 200-foot 13th Street facade, capped with columns for 2 stories at the top and columns for 2 stories at the base. But like the Flatiron, which occupies a narrow triangular site facing Madison Square, the educational building is striking in its 3-dimensional Lego-like form, looking like a fragment torn from one of the commercial buildings with larger avenue frontage uptown. To reiterate, the beauty of 75th Avenue is in its utility. It's a workhorse. It accommodates dedicated, behind-the-scenes work of making New York, the nation, and the world a more just and well-designed space. I leave you asking, so I leave you and I ask you to see the educational building as a cipher with a mysterious expository quality. Join the many generations of Parsons architecture students who have occupied its labyrinth of spaces to understand the DNA of Manhattan Island. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Our next speaker who's joining us is a great friend of Village Preservation and of our preservation work, City Council Member Erik Bottcher.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I want to thank Village Preservation for including me here today. I am so proud to be the council member representing Greenwich Village, and thanks to your efforts, Andrew, and Village Preservation, we have these incredible medallions, these incredible markers throughout the village that as a New Yorker, I've grown to appreciate so much, because you learn so much from those markers that you wouldn't otherwise know. Thomas Paine lived at Marie's Crisis. It's just an example of the things that we wouldn't know if it weren't for these programs. But what we're doing here today is so important because we're marking for future generations to know that the NAACP was located here earlier in its history, 100 years ago. So as we mark this building, let's rededicate ourselves to that mission. And let's redouble our efforts to live up to what they were doing then. And sadly, you could argue that they'd be looking at some of the things we're going through now, the people who worked here, and they'd be very sad that in the year 2022, we'd be undergoing some of the things that we're undergoing now. So as we put up this marker, let's redouble our efforts to achieve racial justice, human dignity in the world. And thank you again to Village Preservation and to the New School for doing this.
Thank you so much for that, Erik, and for that really important message, which is in a lot of ways at the heart of why we're here today. Our next speaker is David Levering Lewis, who is a professor of history at NYU with a focus on 20th century U.S. social history. He was the recipient of the National Humanities Medal in 2010. His numerous books include a 2-part biography on W.E.B. Du Bois, which received 2 Pulitzer Prizes for biography, as well as the Bancroft Prize and the Francis Parkman Prize. Welcome.
On April 2nd, 1913, a stern note reached W.E.B. Du Bois's desk from the publisher of the New York Evening Post and The Nation. Now, until that morning, the NAACP's monthly magazine, The Crisis, a record of the darker races, had appeared, quote, with the cooperation of Oswald Garrison Villard from the first headquarters of the NAACP at 20 Vesey Street. Du Bois had known Villard from their days as Harvard undergraduates in the early 1890s, and it was Villard's electric call that brought the sons and daughters of abolitionists and the new progressives, alarmed by urban racial tensions, to meet at the Charity Organization Society's headquarters on May 1901 to form the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. But now a stunned Du Bois read Villard's curt note. Will you kindly make sure that my name does not appear as contributing editor to The Crisis from this month forward? Tensions in the New York headquarters at 20 Vesey Street both caused and exacerbated tensions in NAACP affiliates in Chicago, where Ida Wells Barnett of anti-lynching renown resigned in a huff after Villard convened a meeting at the local branch without her notice. But in Washington, the second largest NAACP branch was in disarray after Villard engineered the replacement of its head officer on suspicion of kowtowing to Woodrow Wilson's segregationist policies. And in Boston, Theorist Monroe Trotter obstructed the work of its local branch. Meanwhile, board members to oppose Du Bois's editorial independence, to wit, Du Bois's refusal to match white crime statistics with reports of black lawlessness. And above all, Villard was absolutely determined that Du Bois never ascend to the secretariatship of the association as the first person of color. Fair to say, Oswald Garrison Villard believed that his fellow very rich philanthropist Albert Pillsbury was correct to counsel Professor Du Bois to stay at his desk at Atlanta University. Said Pillsbury, periodicals are as numerous and as pestilential as flies in Egypt, and most of them nowadays meet the same reception. Happily, for the significance of today's fitting ceremony, cooler heads prevailed. Great egos were mollified, and the solution found that satisfied both these civil rights avatars. Villard, deciding that his other affairs had begun to suffer, stepped down as the association head and assumed the duty of treasurer. The NAACP board found new headquarters at 75th Avenue. The new space, owned by Ginn and Company publishers, was larger than at Vesey Street and equipped with more elevators. And as Du Bois wrote to his best Atlanta friend and Morehouse College president, John Hope, more light and air. Do drop in. And for $108 per month, twice the cost of the Vesey Street office, one would find for the next decade W.E.B. Du Bois behind large desk, wooden desk, immaculate, waistcoated, received reading copy and correspondence into a dictaphone whose wax cylinders he regularly shaved and recycled. The self-important Augustus Granville Dill put his talents, Harvard-honed in sociology, to account and editorial work. The immensely gifted literary talent of Jessie Redmond Fawcett was soon welcomed aboard at Fifth Avenue flagship, where she helped birth the first children's magazine for children of color in America, the Brownie's Book. To say that 75th Avenue that decade cradled the modern black woman and man, Du Bois's talented tent, is not quite hyperbole, yet its veracity is certainly patent. Jesse Fawcett's discovery of Langston Hughes, of Jean Toomer, of Zora Neale Hurston critically informed the Harlem Renaissance, the labor question and race, the conundrum of racial integration, the nation within the nation, were dilemmas of blackness in a democracy circumscribed by pigment that Crisis fearlessly ventilated and interrogated and deconstructed. What is not, nor ever has been appreciated, is the competitive impact of the Crisis published in this building. With 12 full-time employees, 1,200 subscription agents across the country, and gross revenues of $72,000 in 1919, the circulation of Du Bois's monthly exceeded Herbert Croly's 14-year-old New Republic's 100,000, or Villard's Reorganized Nation, and was 2 times larger than Max Eastman's Liberator, the successor to the masses. The editorial promised 16 more pages in 2020 at 5 cents added to the 10 cents per copy. Unfortunately, the next 2 years would bring decline from the more than 100,000 annual sales, and beyond that, a steep drop in sales and subscriptions. When he returned to the Academy in 1933, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois had achieved much of what he pledged for himself in May 1910 as he departed Atlanta for New York. Stepping therefore in 1910 out of my ivory tower of statistics and investigations, I sought with bare hands to lift the earth and put it in the path in which I ought to go. And this building helped to do that.
Thank you so much. We're getting quite an education here today, and a little more to follow. And along those lines, for anybody who's interested in learning more about the building's history, the neighborhood's history, etc., Anna has some wonderful literature that she's giving out where you can find out more and get more involved. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Stephen Brier, an emeritus professor both in the Urban Education PhD program at the CUNY Graduate Center and in the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. He's a widely published social and labor historian whose most recent book, co-authored with Michael Fabricant, is entitled Austerity Blues: Fighting for the Soul of Public Higher Education. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here today. Why is it important to commemorate and mark historical spaces in New York City like 75th Avenue? I think that doing so helps us remember how frequently citizens of the city, at least some of them, embraced radical and progressive politics, ideas, and movements across the 19th and 20th centuries, providing safe haven and a welcoming environment for many organizations like the early NAACP and the ACLU that began their work in this building, or at least continued their work in this building. These organizations helped shape the ideological and political origins of what my CUNY colleague Josh Freeman has called New York City's social democratic polity, which the city's working class and racial equity movements helped sustain in the 3 decades after World War II. As we stand at 5th Avenue and 13th Street, our proximity to Union Square, 1 block east and 1 block north, is no coincidence. A number of radical and progressive organizations opened offices on or near the square after 1900. I should note, as an aside for those who don't know, that Union Square is not named for the labor movement that helped define it and make it famous, but rather for the merger of two main 19th century thoroughfares in Manhattan, Broadway, and the former Bowery Road, which is now 4th Avenue. I should also note that a new People's Guide to New York City, edited by 3 of my CUNY colleagues and just published by the University of California Press, lists many of the left-wing organizations that were headquartered on or near Union Square in the 1930s. The Amalgamated Clothing Workers and the AFT, which we've heard already about, to name but two. And while the guide includes a reference to the ACLU office at 31 Union Square, it omits the ACLU's original site here at 75th Avenue. I'm going to suggest that the editors correct that oversight in the next edition of A People's Guide to New York City. I want to use my limited remaining time today to talk about W.E.B. Du Bois. It takes a large dose of New York City chutzpah with David Levering Lewis, author of the definitive 2-volume biography of Du Bois, standing right here, but I'm going to plunge ahead anyway. I want to make 3 points about Du Bois, beginning with his connection to 75th Avenue, which you've already heard about. He launched the publication of The Crisis in 1910 and moved it here a little bit later after he helped found the organization in 1909. Under Du Bois's inspired editorship, The Crisis was instrumental, again as you've heard, in calling the Harlem Renaissance into being and publicizing its many gifted artists, while also reporting on the horrors of lynching and other forms of racial repression. Du Bois continued in his role as of the Crisis for 24 years more as a key part of his unwavering commitment to radical intellectual inquiry linked to direct and militant political action. In the premiere November 10 issue of the magazine, The Crisis, Du Bois described the new magazine's goal as, quote, to set forth those facts and arguments which show the danger of race prejudice, particularly as manifested toward colored people, unquote. These words are as resonant today as they were 122 years ago when Du Bois penned them, a sad measure of how little progress we've made in stamping out the twin evils of white supremacy and racial oppression. Du Bois finally gave over the editor's job of The Crisis in 1934 to Roy Wilkins, a sharp declension in my judgment in the editorial leadership of the magazine. The following year, 1935, as David has written so well about, Du Bois finally published his magisterial Black Reconstruction in America, which served at the time as the lone beacon illuminating the vast and arid sea of historical scholarship, and that last word is indeed in scare quotation marks, that defined our nations and the Academy's distorted and contorted explanations of what happened in the dozen years following the North's victory over the Southern slavocracy in 1865. Du Bois's singular contribution in Black Reconstruction in America was to restore agency to the 4 million formerly enslaved African Americans who helped secure the North's victory in the Civil War. If you've never read Du Bois's Black Reconstruction or haven't looked at it in decades, it is well worth the effort, despite its 600 or 700 pages. To immerse oneself in its inspiring eloquence and brilliant historical and political insights. At a minimum, you could also just read Gerald Warren's retrospective analysis of the importance of Black Reconstruction in America in the current online issue of The Nation. And The Nation, by the way, was just up the road here, a half a block. And given how badly Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito misused and mangled the history of Reconstruction and the importance of the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause in his egregious draft opinion that will form the basis of the court's impending overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision, he would be at the top of my list of Americans who should be required to read Du Bois's Black Reconstruction in America. Finally, I want to call our attention to the fact that there are no truly dedicated memorial sites in this country that document Du Bois's huge impact on American society, our politics, and our shared culture. You'd have to travel to Accra, Ghana, where Du Bois was forced to move in exile in 1960 and where he died a year later, to visit the W.E.B. Du Bois Center for Pan-African Culture to find an appropriate shrine to Du Bois's historical importance and his overall political impact. Contrast that with how we've honored Du Bois's legacy in the USA. If you ever visit Du Bois's birthplace in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and enter the town by car on New York, Massachusetts, Route 23, a few miles out of town, you'll see a sign for the W.E.B. Du Bois National Historic Site. After you park and wend your way through the woods by footpath, you come to a single National Historical Site marker and an empty space that tells you this is where the house where W.E.B. Du Bois was born in 1868 once stood. That is how we have chosen in this country to honor one of the 20th century's greatest American intellectual and political figures. Our dedication today of the 75th Avenue as a historical landmark is but a small first step in recognizing, among other individuals and institutions that were based here, W.E.B. Du Bois's enormous contributions to American history and culture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And last but certainly not least, we have Amy Aronson, who's the chair of the Department of Communication and Media Studies at Fordham University. Her work focuses on media history with an emphasis on women and gender. She recently published with Oxford University Press a biography of Crystal Eastman, the co-founder of the ACLU, entitled Crystal Eastman, A Revolutionary Life. And after we hear from Amy, we will have the unveiling. So Amy, please join us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with this distinguished company, and a pleasure to be here to celebrate the landmark status of this incredible building, which served as the headquarters of such an array of civil rights and social justice organizations. It's no wonder this place became home to Crystal Eastman. At the dawn of the 20th century, she was a key figure in many of the defining social movements of the modern era: labor, feminism, civil rights, speech, peace. And in large part, she did it right here at this site. Eastman was a labor lawyer who graduated from NYU Law School in 1907 and soon drafted the nation's first serious workers' compensation law in 1910. She was a leading suffragist and the first person Alice Paul and Lucy Burns contacted when they wanted to pursue a constitutional suffrage amendment and found the National Woman's Party in 1913. What's more, Eastman and Paul are credited as the co-authors of the Equal Rights Amendment, the party's signature policy after the vote was won. Eastman was also a radical journalist, beginning with the Revolutionary Liberator magazine, which she co-published with her brother Max from the office just a few blocks from here on 34 Union Square East. Right here at 75th Avenue, she launched 3 game-changing organizations for democracy and peace. First, the Women's Peace Party of New York in late 1914, the first feminist peace organization in the country, and today the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. This building was also home to the American Union Against Militarism, the only American peace organization to demonstrate that citizen diplomacy could avert war. And oh yeah, right here in this building, Crystal Eastman engineered the founding of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. I feel I must add that Eastman also advocated and lived, right here in this neighborhood, a politics of private life that was no less far-reaching than her public agenda. She was divorced in 1916 after learning of her husband's infidelity, but she refused alimony, telling newspapers at the time that, quote, no self-respecting feminist would accept alimony. It is a relic of the past. Marriage, she said, is a link, not a handcuff. A link, not a chain. Later that year, she married a Brit named Walter Fuller, a pacifist and publicist that she fell in love with on the 8th floor of this building while they were working together on peace campaigns. Eastman and Fuller had 2 children who were raised for a time in their small house nearby at 80 McDougal Street. As a feminist wife and mother, Eastman led debates on issues that are raging with renewed urgency today. Reproductive rights, paid parental leave, wages for housework, feminist masculinity, single motherhood by choice, and even the silenced longing of married mothers for substantive work outside the home, a yearning that anticipates Betty Friedan's famous problem that has no name, nearly a half-century before the breakthrough of the feminine mystique in 1963. And I want to emphasize, for context, that all this and more was advocated by a woman who was born before the invention of the stop sign, before the invention of the zipper, the fly swatter, and the ice cream scoop. Crystal Eastman was a multi-movement activist and a policy innovator, a working mother, and a provocative voice in the debates that shaped her world and our own. Today, she would be called an intersectional activist. And by that I mean she identified with multiple social justice movements spanning issues and organizations. And from the dawn of her public life, she worked to bring these various struggles together, all under one big emancipatory rubric. What better place to pursue a politics like that than a hub like this? In so many ways, this building was not just the site, but the crucible of her political life and public career. From this office, Eastman's organizations mounted a range of trailblazing policy interventions and public demonstrations. For instance, in 1916, the American Union Against Militarism organized its War Against War exhibit, an 11-city immersive spectacle protesting the pre-war military buildup dubbed by the Wilson administration Preparedness. The exhibition included material in multiple languages, silent films with footage of World War I interspersed with crackling text commentary, lunch hour lectures, live tableau, and theme days, a political day, a physician's day, a mother's and suffrage day, speaking to particular anti-war constituencies. Memorably, the exhibition opened in each host city with a gleaming, golden, 17-foot papier-mâché dinosaur they named Jingo. The glimmering beast was paraded through the streets on a horse-drawn platform bearing the cheeky tagline, "All armor plates and no brains. This animal believed in military preparedness and is now extinct." The campaign culminated in a meeting with President Wilson, which Crystal herself arranged. While Wilson's policy on the American military buildup did not change, the traveling pageant was seen by more than 170,000 people, and the American Union grew to 22 branches nationwide before the end of that year. From this building, the Women's Peace Party of New York mounted a challenge to compulsory military training in public schools. When the New York legislature introduced a bill requiring military exercises in all high schools statewide, Crystal's group answered with a massive meeting at Cooper Union to protest what they characterized as an invasion of our public school system by military enthusiasts. Then, they held a free, week-long training school every afternoon in which 40 participants, all of them women, learned arguments and tactics to protest military preparedness on the ground. After the final session, a cavalcade of 8 cars bedecked with bright blue peace flags fanned out through the streets bearing the slogan, "America is safe. Preparedness means war. Work against it." The campaign culminated with 2 truck-sized floats paraded down this very street where we are all standing. One was decorated with German and French flags, 2 of the opposing combatants in World War I. That platform carried young boys at play with baseball bats, and its streamer read, "Boys are boys" in Germany and France. The second platform carried American boys bearing rifles. Its streamer read, "Boys are now soldiers" in New York State. Not for nothing, the Women's Peace Party also operated a nationwide press service here, they organized open-air meetings and congressional hearings, and they published an outspoken periodical called The Four Lights. From this very doorstep, Eastman herself led rallies drawing hundreds of people and called on the nation to claim its destiny as the prime mover of permanent international peace. But when the United States entered World War I in 1917, the national climate shifted dramatically when it came to protests for peace. Both the Women's Peace Party and the American Union came under unprecedented repression and censorship by the U.S. government. Public vigilantes threatened and attacked their offices and their members as well. In response, Eastman engineered a plan to form a separate legal bureau to protect democratic rights in wartime: free press, free speech, freedom of assembly, and liberty of conscience. The new bureau, which effectively sought to claim the public exercise of democracy as a human right, became the American Civil Liberties Union. This building was its first home. Crystal Eastman died at only 47 years old, and still trying to live in a world she labored all her life to call into being. The social justice issues she cared about, gender equality and human rights, nationalism and globalization, political censorship and media control, worker benefits and family balance, and the monumental questions of war, sovereignty, force, and freedom remain some of the most pressing questions of our own time. This plaque recognizes that. It honors this inspirational home as our demands for democracy and justice endure and can never, ever be demolished. Thanks for coming out in celebration of that.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you to all of our speakers, and we are now going to have the unveiling. And I'm just going to quickly say before I do, if you're interested in either learning about or helping us to fight to save, educate the public about, promote more of this kind of civil rights and social justice history, so much of which is all around us, so much of which we still need to learn from, do get more involved. Anna and others have literature that you can take, letting you know how you can educate yourself, join, etc. So hopefully this is something we will keep doing. So I'm going to ask all of the speakers and everyone from the New School to come up here with me. Everybody wants to sort of grab a little piece of there we go. And I'm going to see if I can this here. Whoops, there we go. And I'm just gonna, here we go, read from this. It says 75th Avenue. This building served as headquarters for the NAACP and as the early home of numerous other progressive human rights and civil liberties organizations. It also housed W.E.B. Du Bois The Crisis magazine, a platform for civil rights advocacy and for writers Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston, and Countee Cullen, among many others. So this will be here hopefully in perpetuity under the wonderful stewardship of the New School to let the public know about the incredibly rich history that took place here. And of course the landmark designation will help ensure that this building stays here forever. So thank you again so much to everybody for coming out. Thank you to the New School, all of our speakers, all of you for your support for the work that we do, and let's keep fighting to make sure that this history is remembered and honored. Thanks very much.